But I think the biggest key is kind of you need variety within your program. Don't just keep doing the same old stuff. Shock the body.
That Triathlon Show, episode 77. Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host, Michael, and on today's episode, I talk with legendary former time trialist and turned triathlete, actually, and in particular, triathlon and cycling coach, Matt Bottrill. We'll discuss how Matt's cycling coaching helped Tim Don smash the record for the fastest ever Ironman branded race this summer in 2017 in Brazil, which included a 4:06 bike split. We talk about the steps they took, which is the same kind of pathway that Matt takes with the age group athletes as well. Initial assessments and getting the lay of the land, creating an action plan, and then monitoring and moving along and having repeatable tests to check the progress. And the main takeaway is probably the importance of your bike position and training to hold that position and generate power from it while staying very, very aerodynamic. That's sort of Matt's sweet spot, his area of expertise, so definitely something you want to tune into. Before that, though, this episode is sponsored by Precision Hydration, a study that I'll link to in the show notes of over 400 amateur athletes showed that around 31% of them were turning up to training and racing dehydrated. And Andy Blow from Precision Hydration wrote a detailed blog post on how to start your training and racing hydrated and why that's so important for performance. So again, see that link in the show notes to get to the blog post, which is very, very good and detailed. I use pH 1500 for preloading before all my races and before key workouts. And you can get that or any other Precision Hydration products for 15% off when you use the discount code That Triathlon Show, all one word, all caps, on precisionhydration.com. Now, a few quick words about Matt before we start the interview. He is a UK-based former elite cyclist, a very handy triathlete, and a fantastic coach in cycling, triathlon, and duathlon. Among his career highlights as an athlete are the fastest times ever ridden in the UK for 50 miles and for 25 miles, the second fastest ever 10-mile time trial. Those times, by the way, 17:40 for 10 miles, 45:43 for 25 miles, and 1:34:43 for 50 miles. Plus, he has countless wins and course records to his name. He founded Matt Bottrill Performance Coaching in 2014 to bring his training principles and also his bike fitting expertise to the bigger audience. And his coaching career highlight is without a doubt coaching Tim Don's cycling to the fastest ever Ironman result in history in an Ironman branded race with that 7:40 result in Brazil this summer. So let's hear how he did that, and as always, of course, grab the takeaways for us normal mortal age groupers, which Matt was very good at distilling. Matt Bottrill, welcome to That Triathlon Show.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. It's good to touch base.
Yeah, it's brilliant to have you. I came across your work in and your past history as well in time trialing when I saw Tim Don's fastest ever Ironman branded Ironman race in Brazil this summer 2017. He had a 7 hours 40 minute result and a bike split of 4:06:56. And when I started digging deeper into that, I found out about you and that you have been working with Tim on his cycling specifically, and his running and swimming is under the watchful eyes of Julia Dibbons. But
that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So you've been involved for how long with Tim's cycling coaching?
I started working with Tim. It was back in 2016. It would have been July 2016. He kind of approached me, and just progressed from there, really.
Yeah, so you had a good year to work on things, and how did you start when Tim first got started with you? What kinds of initial steps and initial assessments even did you do to set the baseline?
It's just the same assessment as you give everybody. It's kind of we look at the individual, so we power profile them, analyze kind of the data.
What goes into the power profiling? What different at what different durations, and how do you do that more specifically?
It's kind of just looking at past history. It's like for me, I'll look at all the times that they've spent in specific training zones. Uh, it's looking at how they race. It's looking at every kind of fine detail. It's kind of seeing, not only looking at, I think where a lot of training goes wrong. Everybody thinks of what the demands of the race are, rather than uh, kind of the terrain and like kind of course profiling. How do you train for the demands of the event that you're racing for? And I'm not, there's no such thing as kind of riding at one even pace, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Yeah. So in addition to the power profiling, looking at the history, what were the other first steps that you took in those first few weeks or whatever it was when you first got started?
Kind of just working out, looking at Tim's position on the bike, 'cause obviously that's a key factor. Looking at, how, we always look at our athletes' pace races. He's kind of looking at every detail, the setup of the bike, the setup of the athlete, uh, just every, I'm a big believer in trying to find 1%, all the 1% possible. So, that's kind of how I break it down.
All right, and yeah, we'll get back to that the bike position and setup a bit later in more detail, because that's one of your specialties, and training that to be able to generate power and hold that for a long duration.
Yeah.
But after taking those initial steps, I guess you put some sort of more long term and short term action plan together. So what kinds of things did you decide to work on, and what were the goals and the objectives long term and shorter term as well?
So it's the same for everybody. You've got to it's kind of looking at what that athlete wants to achieve. And then, it's kind of, once you know what their specific goal is, then you kind of work back from that. And then ultimately, you're looking at uh, building, building the training program that's going to make them peak for these specific races. And I know it's like what is realistically in terms of peaking, and I would say it's 3 times a year. So, for Tim, it was kind of working out what the peaks were going to be within the season, and then me and Julie sitting down and working backwards from those.
Yeah, and so what on the bike specifically? What how much what did you like engineer backwards from? Did you know certain power numbers, or was it more specifically race times that you knew, or splits, I should say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're kind of looking at, previous what, I was kind of initially it was kind of working out what is the ultimate Ironman, and, world professional level. And then, the great thing about athletes in triathlon, they kind of give a lot of data away. So once you know what it kind of takes to win, then you can kind of work back from that. So, it was kind of, for me, we were looking at, not just, no, I think everybody just gets obsessed with, like, they'll see a number an athlete produces, but then they don't take into factors of, like, the power to weight of the rider, the aerodynamic drag of the athlete. And that's kind of what we were doing. I was looking at what was it going to take to win these races.
Do you have a specific way that you determine the aerodynamic drag? Do you use even wind tunnels, perhaps, or do you estimate it based on different protocols, or use something like best bike split?
Yeah, well, yeah, you can use things like best bike split. There's things like golden cheetah you can use, and then uh, and it's kind of and obviously wind tunnel data, track data, but it's also kind of taking in how realistic it is to hold that position for the entire race. And it's kind of how I look at it is, I know, you can get data from all these devices, but ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to give the athlete a pacing strategy. And it's my strategy is kind of knowing how to use speed, power, and aerodynamics. And once, I know what the athlete's doing right and wrong, then I can give them specific sessions within training to get them to adapt to, riding in different positions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what were like the biggest goals that you needed, or the biggest improvements that you needed to make? Was it more on the aerodynamic side, or on the power side, or a combination of?
It's kind of a combination of the two. It was looking at, it was definitely two, and it's like what is my strategy? It's kind of, how do I get anybody I'm working from, anybody I'm working with, is trying to get them from the start line, from the point of A to B in the fastest time possible. And it doesn't all just come from one element. It's kind of, it's every fine detail, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So, and you have said already many times that this is the same kind of approach that you take with age groupers that you also work with. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to look at, it's like, you look at the individual, whether they're a professional athlete or an age group athlete, and the kind of, I think where a lot of training goes wrong is they kind of look at, they'll say that, right, you're doing 70.3, you're doing Ironman, you might be doing sprint triathlon, and then they think about the race. They don't think about the demands, and a lot of people, I don't think they think about how individuals adapt to training in different ways. And that's what you've got, that's what's great about analysing data and, downloading your own ride and looking at past history, because everybody kind of adapts to training differently.
So can I ask you, Matt, what do you mean when you say that people think about the race, but they don't think about the demands? What do you mean by that? The demands in this case?
So the demands, it might be there's a hill on the course, kind of the course profile. Thinking about the training, not just thinking about, right, you're going to set this power. That's it. It's kind of knowing, it's looking at all the course itself, if that makes sense, and then knowing where to optimize speed, power, and aerodynamics.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, brilliant. And we've actually just recently had Stephen Chung on in a two-part interview. Yeah. He's the author of Cycling Science, and we talked about that a little bit. How, like, for example, on a flat course, how much of the power you need to generate is to overcome aerodynamics, and how that changes when you get on a certain degree slope, and how that can play into your race strategy. Yeah. So yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing, it's like, I get a lot of data from when people have, they've been to the wind tunnel or the track or whatever, but they don't. What you've got to do is you get this data and you get this position, and you might get this CDA number, you might have this power number, but you've also got to train the body to be able to hold these positions. So that's another thing that I can do with the training that we're giving people. We've got to do drills. That's the biggest thing. I came into triathlon. I know. I could see when I first came into it, everybody kind of, you ask somebody how to swim when I first started, everybody told me you need to catch your water this way, you need to hold your hand in this position. But ask somebody then, so how do you ride? Like, people just say, you get on it and you try to hold the position. But it's the same kind of strategy. You've got to break the drills of training exactly as you would in swimming.
Yeah, so that's an interesting, very very good point or points that you make there. So let's say that you start working with somebody and you change their bike position to get more out of them aerodynamically, and then you need to train them to be able to hold that position for the duration of the race and the demands of the race, which may also come into play there. So what's that training process like? What does it take to get used to that, and then how extreme can you go with an age grouper that has a limited time on the bike, for example? So you might not be able to make the same adaptation to a more extreme position that a pro that can spend hours and hours on the bike. So can you tell me a bit more?
I think it's the same. It's the same. You say that, but I think the biggest area that most athletes make is they don't spend enough time on the bars. We can look at obviously we all know that it's kind of narrowing the shoulders, holding the head in a good position is key. But the first phase is spending more time on the bike or the position that you're going to race in, and that's where most people they'll get obsessed with their power number. But hit that power number, they'll probably come out of their time trial position. So if you're restricted on time, then realistically you should be doing more on your base setup and thinking about all these elements. I don't think, even if you've got you can do 2 rides a week, then if that's all you've got, then you've got to optimize the time that you're spending in the time trial position.
Yeah, and that's so. When you say that, what exactly does that mean? That you got to optimize that? Does that mean just?
So it's kind of doing. So it's initially for most people, it's being able to stay in the time trial position without moving out of it. Then after that phase, it's kind of looking at how you hold your shoulders and how you hold your head. And once or training, one of the biggest things I always tell athletes is right. We set them up in these positions, or they'll give me winter data, and I'll say, right, this is your magic number, this is your CDA. But what you've got to then be able to do is train that position in front of the mirror. So that's a good, it's kind of, if you start looking at your position in the mirror, you can start making changes to it. You can see how narrow you can get yourself. So it's kind of looking at all those elements.
Yeah, you just removed Netflix from all the listeners' indoor training sessions now, and now they need to replace it with a mirror.
Yeah, that's it. Everybody's going on. Is it Zwift and all this kind of stuff? Where get a mirror, put some tunes on. Watch yourself. It's quite vain, I guess, but that's how you're going to ride faster.
Yeah, but I agree. When you train for a very limited time, then you really need to make those hours count, and in whatever way you can. And if that means being 100% in the moment and focusing on your position, then that's definitely one of those ways that you can get the most out of that very limited time for training. You can get away with more if you have more hours to train and still perform at a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is the time of year, we're just coming into this winter phase. Obviously, some people are still racing, but a lot of people can go back to basics. It's like with swimming now, a lot of people will do that. But it's kind of now, even if you're just, riding your bike at zone 2, you can still be doing specific sets to get you, into a better position. And that's what you should be working at. That's what you should be working on. It's kind of like, these are my weaknesses. It might be produce more power or whatever it is. You've got to look at, to progress, you've always got to train your weaknesses.
Yeah. And so when you say specific sets, does that just mean spending a few minutes really, really trying to nail your position and then relaxing a bit for a time in between, or do you have any?
Absolutely. I would just say it's, small, so it might be, holding shoulders, you might only be able to hold, 20 seconds or a minute, and it's gradually progressing now. So you might say, so I do 10 sets today of a minute. Within, ideally, I'd say that you want to progress it, same as you do an interval where you do so much on, so a minute on, probably 2 or 3 minutes off, and then you go again. And then initially you start narrowing the gap in between the recovery periods. And that's how eventually, the first phase is if you can hold then 10 minutes in aero position, you made a significant step forward. Then you might be able to do 2 sets within maybe an hour's session. So yeah, it's gradual progression is the key.
Yeah, brilliant. What about the role of power and training to be able to sustain power in that position? How do you take away a significant amount of power when you set people up on their more optimal new positions and then they gradually get it back by training in that position? Or do you try to adapt the bike fit so that you go up until the point where power starts to drop significantly, and then you just want the athlete to learn to sustain holding that power for longer in that position, but they haven't actually lost a lot of power, maybe just a little? What's your take on that?
Initially, it's kind of, I think that there's a trade-off that you'll drop power. And if you go too aggressive, then you'll lose a lot of power, and the trade-off in aerodynamics might not be worth it. But that's the biggest thing with aerodynamics and power is there's always going to be a trade-off between the two. But that's when it comes to doing different tests in different positions, and it's kind of finding that sweet spot, and that's a matter of looking at you've got to keep analysing data and speeds, and that can be it's hard. And I would say that a lot of people do lose power, but generally most people, they'll get it back. But if you go too aggressive too soon, then you've got to work out what the trade-off is, and there's not like a magic answer for that, because again, everybody is so different.
So do you have one specific tip for like monitoring that progress of and the trade-off between aerodynamics and power? Like, is it actually going to the track and comparing times and power and plotting those out, or is there one way that somebody listening to this can get started with being more aware of this?
It's repeatable tests. You could do like a repeatable test, whether it be like on a stretch of road, that you use. You can analyze it that way. That's probably one of the best things. Using it's like using I don't know, we use a bike. You can do specific tests on that where you do you could do a run for like 4 minutes or 5 minutes and just see what the trade-off is. That you've got to just do something that's very repeatable. I think that's the way to be able to do that. But you can get crazy with it, I suppose.
Yeah. All right, and let's move into the actual training, and improving fitness a little bit, because as I mentioned in the intro, you have a very, very strong background in time trialing and have set all sorts of records and won all sorts of victories on in the UK. You're a bit of a legend in that field. So what are, if you can give just 3 short tips in terms of bike training and improving fitness, not related to aerodynamics or bike setup or anything, just the training part?
I'm going to say one of the key elements is that I would always say that a lot of people spend way too much time in, like kind of no man's land. And I would say that that's like it's like zone 1. I see a lot of that, especially this time of year. But kind of to get the biggest adaptation, I would say that it's kind of sweet spot. So I don't know if your listeners, what sweet spot is. It's kind of
they do, and we can refer to episode 29 as well, where I talked about that. So go on.
That's one of that's a big one that we use with athletes. If you can get to the stage where you can sustain an hour at sweet spot, then I'd say that you're pretty much bulletproof. And that's the key set, like that level 3 and the sweet spot area, kind of 80 to 90% should be the core of most athletes' programs. Kind of micro tools, they're really good for in that top end, and they can be, vary anywhere between 10 and 30 seconds, but they need to be kind of maximal efforts, and building blocks of those anywhere, just depending on where you're starting off. It might be anywhere between 10 minutes to up to even an hour, and again, recovery time, I would say that 4 to 5 minutes. There's a lot in that kind of area that you'll get significant improvements. I suppose they're the kind of the 2, and then again, I'd say that that's the 2 elements that you can incorporate in your training. And ideally, you want to have sets within your training that are going beyond beyond the pace that you're going to race at, if that makes sense. And I think that's where a lot of people they'll train at the pace that they're going to race at, or just a bit below it. But you need to try and progress. You need to go above that.
Yeah.
And just not trying to do everything all at once. It's it's like it's like for me, I can make any triathlete get faster on the bike, but it's trying to get the synergy of it all together, if that makes sense, with the swim and the run. That's that's an art in itself. But
yeah. Okay, that's great. Those are great tips, and yeah, those short repeats that you mentioned there, we've had those come up before as well, and they are, and there's quite good research on those as well, that they are really efficient.
yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest key is kind of you need variety within your program. Don't just keep doing the same old stuff. Shock the body. If you're tracking your data on training peaks, you see the outline, it keeps plateauing out. Then kind of right, you need to probably recover and then shock the body. If you've run out of hours, you've got to try. The body's very clever, and it adapts to the same kind of training consistently. It adapts to it, and you won't get progression. So if you've been doing it a long time and you're not seeing that progression, then you kind of need to shock it a little bit, and then it doesn't know what's hit it, and then that's when you'll gradually see this progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, one more question before moving into the rapid fire questions. This is not particularly related to cycling, but I'm very interested in this topic myself. And I saw on your blog that you're using HRV on yourself, I believe, and on some of your athletes. So what have you learned so far, and how have you or your athletes benefited from using HRV?
Yeah, I think kind of, RA variability. It is very good. I think for triathlon, it's really clever, because what I never understood initially was, it's like when you do that long run, you might feel recovered, but it's kind of the stress it's put your body under. I don't think we understand that sometimes. So, what I found is by tracking my HRV, and then sometimes not necessarily doing that really hard session, then I'm less prone to getting ill. I can make sure that I'm more consistent within my training itself. And I'd say that's the biggest element that I've found from it. You've got, and it is, we use an app called iAthlete. And I found that
I use HRV for training myself, just to give a couple of different options for anybody that wants to check any app out.
Yeah, there's loads of different apps. The one that I've used, but it does really, it links into Training Peaks. This does as well, and it kind of, on the performance management chart, you can track it. But I definitely say it's been beneficial for myself and a few of the athletes that we work with, in changing the plan around sometimes, and kind of, I'd say it's very accurate in terms of, like if it's telling me that I'm going to get ill. If I haven't, like if I've said, I don't believe that, and I've trained, generally I will pick something up. So it's definitely something that's worth monitoring, and I think you just got to keep tracking it over time. But yeah, it's another gain. It's another one of these, another marginal gain that you can use.
Yeah, it can help you recover, and as we all know, you don't get fitter from just training, but you need to recover from that training, and that's where HRV can help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest element with training. It's kind of consistency is key. We can look at every different method of training, but it's kind of, you've got to get consistency there, and then that's when you'll get more form.
Yeah. So just for reference for the listeners, we had Dan Plus on in episode 42 talking about HRV. HRV is heart rate variability, for those that are new to this, which is a kind of emerging metric that's used to measure recovery. But go and check out episode 42. So Matt, let's roll into the rapid fire questions, and let's start with, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon or cycling?
I don't like quick rapid. I don't do that much reading. Blogs, I just follow loads of different people, so I've not got a specific person or blog or anything that I kind of enjoy.
Okay.
I like following everything.
When somebody says that they don't really have any favorite, then I always put the words in their mouth and say that, well, it's this podcast then.
Absolutely. There we go.
Let's go with that. What's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
Oh, probably my giant bike. My time trial bike. Yeah, I like tinkering with that.
Mm. And finally, what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success when you were an athlete?
Just never giving in, consistency, mentally being strong. That train the brain. That's what I'd say.
What did you do to train the brain and train the mental side when you were competing?
For me, well, I'm still going to compete. It's kind of me. I'm making a comeback, next year. But it's kind of what did I focus on? I always focused on, improving myself. I always thought about my rivals, and just touching on something that's happened in your life. Like when you're suffering. For me, it was always just go into that real dark place. So I always touched on that. You know, that's how I could push myself. I can see it in athletes now. One of the things we always do with people is we give them like intervals to failure, and kind of you are going to fail at this, but you can kind of gauge how strong somebody mentally is by they get to a set number. I don't want to say what those numbers are, but I can always kind of if they're listening, then they'll be like, oh right, I've got to get to that for them to think I've progressed. But that's a big one. I always find this intervals to failure. I can see the people that they might say they want to win like a national or a big race, but it's whether mentally they can do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
it does.
Pushing beyond your barriers.
Yeah, it does, and that's a whole topic on itself that we can talk about another day. But it's interesting to hear your take on it with your background in elite sports. So, if listeners want to learn more about you, your website is mattbottrillperformancecoaching.com.
Yes,
and you got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We'll have them all in the show notes.
Oh, that's really kind of you. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there anything else that you want to mention before we?
No, just thanks for having me on. We've got it's great to touch base. I'm kind of I love the sport of triathlon. It's great. I've just done it for 2 years myself. I'm not going to be doing triathlon next year, but there's so many great people, and I think I've learned so much from it. In the time that I've done it.
Yeah, brilliant, and let's hope that all the UK listeners, there are quite a few of them. I can tell you that. Let's hope that they check you out and maybe come in for a bike fit or a consultation or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got we've got 6 coaches, so we've got kind of an array of people with different. I'm not sure what the word is, but especially they're special in specific areas. So yeah, get in touch.
Brilliant. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Matt Bottrill. Thanks for taking the time, Matt.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
So that was quite a doozy, wasn't it? I really found that had some really incredibly valuable points that I wasn't aware of before. And yeah, you can tell that Matt is a class act. He was a class act in his time trialing days, and now in his coaching. This interview definitely shows you that as well. And for all of the show notes from this episode, you can go to thattriathlonshow.com. And I want to give you a quick takeaway. I've been pretty bad at doing these recently, just because the interviews tend to run a bit long, and I'm aware of your precious time, and I don't want to make these episodes go on for too long. But this time it was a bit shorter, so I can afford to spend a minute elaborating. And I think that Matt's point about wasting time with junk miles or junk minutes bike training, that was a good one, and one that hasn't come up too much recently, at least on the show. So I wanted to bring that up as the main or one of the most interesting points from this episode. And doing a lot of sweet spot work, that's something that, for example, Trainer Road are big on doing that. And you can go to episode 39 to hear Chad Timmerman from Trainer Road, or 38, I believe it was. Sorry, I'll link to that in the show notes as well, to hear him talk about the importance of sweet spot training. And yes, for those age groupers that are time crunched, which is most, if you are training, you're on the bike 2 times per week, I definitely agree with Matt. That's something that I use in my coaching as well. This time of year, maybe some sort of technical work, but very soon it will be not any sort of junk miles, but really going into that sweet spot kind of work and trying to build your bike fitness from that way. So that was my main takeaway from this episode, but there are many more, and you can find them on thattriathlonshow.com on the show notes page. One more thing, I've been really happy recently that a number of people have been sharing the podcast on Twitter and Facebook, and it really has made a significant impact in download numbers. Actually, after the Stefan Guienne episode in episode 73, I had the biggest ever download day for the podcast, so I was very pleased with that, fist bumping and doing all sorts of noises when I saw the download numbers the following day, so that was cool. And just know that you make me very happy when you share the podcast, and it really helps a lot. So please do that if you enjoy it and you have friends that might enjoy it. Go ahead and share this podcast. That's one of the best ways that you can help if you feel that the podcast has helped you and want to pay it back in a little way. And finally, thank you to Precision Hydration for supporting this podcast. Go and take their free online sweat test on precisionhydration.com to get a personalized hydration strategy for your next race, and use the discount code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, for 15% off any purchases. And again, check out that hydration preloading blog post that's linked up down below in the show notes. Thank you as always for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.